So by 1978, John's crawl space under his house where he was hiding bodies was absolutely maxed out. He couldn't fit any more bodies under the house. So he was like, I could put bodies up in the attic, that's an option. But he realized that it's a terrible option because the bodies would probably leak when they decomposed, and then it would come through the ceilings and just be a big old mess. So instead, John decided it would be best if maybe he stopped using his house as a graveyard. So instead, he started to throw them into the local river, Des Plaines River. And he would end up doing this 5 different times. On December 11th, 1978, at 9 p.m., there was a 15-year-old high school student named Robert who was finishing up his shift at the local pharmacy. So he's working there at the local pharmacy. You get it. His mom comes to pick him up, right? She comes to pick up Robert. She's going to take him home. And they're excited because it's actually his mom's birthday. It's her 46th birthday. And they have plans to just celebrate with the whole family, have some cake, whatever. So she's waiting for him. And her son, Robert, runs out of the pharmacy and runs to the car and is like, hey, Mom, can you wait a few minutes? There's this guy who offered me a construction job that pays $5 an hour. And it would be awesome to make that kind of money because it was like twice what he was making at his current job. So his mom is like, sure, like, go ahead, honey, I'll wait right here. And she's just waiting outside for Robert to come back. Well, some time passes by and Robert doesn't come back. So she's like, dude, where is he, So she's getting a little nervous. She looks around for him. She's not seeing him. So his mom drives home and she tells her husband, okay, Robert was there 1 minute and now he's just missing. So the whole family, it's Robert's mom and dad, his 2 siblings, and their 2 dogs, they all pile into the family car, head back to the local pharmacy, and they look for Robert. Now, they're searching for quite some time, and they can't find any clues. Nothing. He just poof vanished. Finally, it got late into the night. It was like 11:30 at night. Robert's mom decides to go to the police and file a missing persons report. Poor thing. It was her birthday. Now, this case, it would hit close to home for a new police lieutenant that was working there that night because his son was attending the same high school as Robert, and he just resonated with this woman and her missing son. He's afraid that his own son might be at risk of a similar fate. So the lieutenant insists on taking this case on himself. He's determined to find answers. Okay, he's not just going to write it down as missing. He's going to do something about it. And at this point, he was only the chief of detectives for about 6 months. So many were saying like, oh, he probably had something to prove, which is so annoying. Maybe he was doing his damn job. You wish every police officer would react like this guy. So, okay, this lieutenant asked, when was the last time you saw him, right? And he discovers that John Wayne Gacy, he was one of the contractors who recently helped remodel the pharmacy that Robert was working at. So he thought to himself, like, maybe John was the contractor Robert was talking to about that potential job. Like, that kind of makes sense, right? So the lieutenant calls up John and leaves a message asking like, hey, can you come into the station for questioning? Just want to talk. Then at 11 p.m. on December 12th, John calls up the lieutenant and asks like, hey, do you still want to talk to me? And the lieutenant's like, yeah. Can you get here today? How long do you think it'll take you to get here? Like, I'll be here. And John's like, I'll be there in a half an hour. So the lieutenant's like, great. Can't wait. Well, time goes by and then it's like 1 a.m. and John is still a no-show. So he's like, great. But you know what? John was actually super busy at that time because when John had called up the lieutenant, he actually was in the middle of something. He was in the middle of taking Robert's body and trying to get rid of it. So he's on the phone with the lieutenant, click, right? So he ends up loading Robert's body into the trunk of his car, and then he drives south so he can dump the body in the river. So John drops the body off, and he's now driving to go talk to the lieutenant. And I guess he must have hit like a patch of ice or something because his truck spun out and it was like 2 a.m. and John's car was getting towed out of a snowbank. So then once everything's all settled, At 3 a.m., covered in mud, John walks into the police station. He's like, hey, I'm here to meet with the lieutenant. And whoever was at the main desk is like, it's 3 in the morning. Why don't you come back later? And, you know, he didn't have to come back, right? He could have just ran for it. But you know what? John, being that outstanding citizen he is, he comes back the next day. So John comes back and gives his brief statement to the lieutenant. And honestly, the lieutenant's getting weird vibes from John. And he's thinking John is holding Robert hostage in his house. So he asked for the keys to John's house. Now, John was a little hesitant to give over his keys for obvious reasons. But he eventually hands over his keys. He's like, yeah, you could search my house. And they do. So the cops, they hold John in custody while they search his home. So the cops end up going to John's home and they do search his house and they don't really find much. And by not finding much, I mean, they aren't really finding any evidence as to like what may have happened to Robert. But what they do find is plenty of gay porn, some needles, a starter pistol, some rope, and an 18-inch dildo. Oh, and the handcuffs. You know? Okay. None of this is illegal to own, but the lieutenant's kind of frustrated because he just has this feeling that John knows something, but he fears that this is a dead end. So they keep looking around, and then they come across a receipt. And on the receipt, they find a charge for film that was being developed at the pharmacy where Robert worked. This seems to be enough evidence to convince the cops to seize John's car, van, and pickup truck to be searched later, hoping that one of the vehicles will at least have some kind of clue in it. So they have the cars searched and they find some fibers that could possibly be hair, but it's not super conclusive. They also have one of those trained dogs come and sniff around the cars to see if like they could smell Robert or death. You know how some of the dogs can smell death? Dogs are magical. So they have the dog come. And the dog's searching one of the cars, and the dog lays down on the passenger seat of the car. And the dog handler is like, oh, that's his reaction to death. That's his death reaction. And it was believed that Robert's body had probably been in there at some point. But they have all this information, but it doesn't mean anything. Like there's no hard evidence that turns up to prove that Robert is linked to John. Police take some stuff from John's house, but nothing the police confiscated could connect John to Robert's disappearance. So at 11 p.m. that night, John was released from prison because they had nothing on him, you know? One day later, on December 15th, one of the items police seized during the search of his home, it comes back with a positive ID. But it's not a positive ID to Robert. It's actually... it belongs to a high school kid. It was his class ring, and this kid had been missing for 2 years. Why does John have it? And not only that, when one of John's employees were questioned, one of them tells police that some former employees just had disappeared. Like, they don't know what happened. They were here one day and then gone the next. Pretty suspicious, I'm sure we can all agree. John's got the class ring of a kid who disappeared a couple of years ago, and some of his employees have gone missing. Great. Just what we need. Now, that same day, John calls up the police and invites them over for breakfast. Not sure why, but it was rumored that one of them was totally John's type and he had a bit of a crush on him. The cops noticed that John, he's not looking too good. He's looking a little tired, anxious. Maybe something's wearing on him a little bit, huh? But that's not all the police notice. When they're over at John's house, one of them said instantly when they walked in, they could smell death, which sounds gross, you know? But they say death has a certain smell, and the police officer is like, I smell it. Like, what is that smell? And he brings it up to John, and John's like, oh yeah, I have mold. It's mold. Oh, and I got some rodents over there. So it's just stinky. No big deal. So I guess the smell of John's house really wasn't enough for police to search his home again, right? Like you think it would be, but it's not. Instead, John got a lawyer. He lawyered up, and John's lawyer actually filed a $750,000 lawsuit against the city and the police department. His lawyer was saying that the police were harassing John and doing illegal searches, and they were also just taking stuff that they weren't allowed to. Plus, they were destroying poor John's reputation in the whole process. So they were not allowed to search his home again. What a freaking mess, right? But luckily, finally, police, they really didn't have to wait that much longer, because on December 21st, 1978, John was followed to a gas station, okay? The cops were following him, and they saw him pass off like a package to one of the clerk workers at the gas station. The package was seized. It had a bunch of weed in there, and this was great because it's like what they needed to finally arrest John for something, right? They just wanted to hold him so they could further search his house. So they're like, yippee skippy, we got him. Yes, he gets arrested. Meanwhile, the day before John is arrested for the weed situation, he actually goes to visit his lawyer, and his lawyer wants to discuss that civil lawsuit they're filing, the $750,000. So he's like, come on over, we're going to talk about it, whatever. So when John gets there, instead of talking about the civil lawsuit, John sees like the local newspaper on his lawyer's desk, and he reads like the head story. It's about that kid who went missing. His name's Robert. And John, I guess, looks at it, and the first thing he says is, he's dead. He's in a river. And just like that, it was over, baby. I guess John sat there for hours confessing everything to his lawyer, saying that he had killed 32 men after having sexual relations with them. 32 men.